Okay, we have 301. Well, welcome. Good afternoon. My name is Jim Kreutel, Director of Marketing for TorchLight. Welcome to our new webinar series, Torch Talk, where we will discuss interesting trends in cybersecurity. This afternoon, our topic is putting the R in MDR. If you have any questions, drop them into the chat. We will pause during today's seminar to take your questions. Joining me for the webinar are three distinguished TorchLight speakers. Stefan Heath serves as the CTO and vCISO in our advisory services practice. Stefan has been a fixture in the cybersecurity industry for nearly 2 decades, having served every role from ethical hacker to CISO. Stefan is a frequent guest of conferences and podcasts where he thrives in discussing the strange and bizarre side of information security. Stefan holds a Master of Science in Computer Science, or Master of Science in Computer Science from Eastern Washington University, where he previously served as an adjunct lecturer of information security. Harry Regan serves as a client advisor, vCISO, in our advisory services practice. Harry has over 35 years of experience in technology, security, and privacy, and has participated with a dozen new technology companies. In the mid-1990s, Harry joined NASDAQ as Director of Information Security Technology. For his work with utility clients, Harry was recently appointed to the Utility Advisory Board of the Security Industry Association. Harry holds a BA in economics from Catholic University and a Master of Science in Information Technology and Operations Research from American University. And finally, we have Gary Blosser, manages the Incident Response Department and is the principal security architect for TorchLight. Gary's 20 years in information security has encapsulated almost every aspect of the field, from published cryptography research through red team actions and compliance auditing. Gary holds a dual Master of Science degree in information technology and information security from Carnegie Mellon University, where he previously served as a research fellow. Welcome, panel. Before we begin the discussion, I want to announce that we'll be doing a raffle today. And the prize will be a $100 gift card and a 1-hour advisory consultation with Stefan Heath. So, putting the R in MDR, what does that mean? Well, let me provide a quick MDR market overview to provide some context. According to Gartner, 50% of organizations will be using MDR services by 2025. Gartner forecasts MDR market, the MDR market will reach $2.1 billion in revenue in 2025, which is up over $1 billion from 2021. According to Jeff Pollard, Forrester MDR analyst, MSSPs are racing to MDR. MSSPs have abandoned the alert factory model by shifting their focus and their marketing dollars to manage detection. So delivering the R. According to Forrester, clients lend trust to their providers in detection, but don't extend the same to response. According to Gartner, threat remediation is rarely performed by MDR providers. However, security leaders should be demanding threat containment. So the analysts say MDR providers are not delivering the R. So that said, my first question to the panel: what are the barriers and the roadblocks keeping clients from handing over the response to MDR providers, even when they're paying for it? Stefan, why do you think this is happening?
Well, I think it boils down to, honestly, a simple word: it's trust. To really be able to hand over the responsibility and the ability, frankly, to take actions within a network, you have to trust the provider that you're giving that to understand what is our environment, what actions can you take and what actions can't you take, what's regular traffic and what's suspicious traffic. Really being able to put that understanding together to be able to safely take action and not make mistakes is really the linchpin to being able to provide, the response, the R in MDR.
Harry, what's your perspective on this?
Well, to add to that a bit, and historically, I think a lot of purchasers of MDR type services, would really better trust their own staffs, to handle their unique environment. The reality is technology has gotten more complicated as attacks have gotten more sophisticated, that trust may be misplaced, really. It's like going to the doctor. You've got stomach pains, you go in, the doctor diagnoses you with appendicitis. Do you really want your coworkers to help you out on that? It's better to get a professional. And the managed service providers aren't just seeing your environment, they're seeing a variety of environments. So they may have their perspective on what the real situation is and what the real mitigation or remediation is.
Interesting. Gary, do you have anything to add?
Oh, I definitely agree that trust is the biggest piece of this, but I think there's also a little bit of an undercurrent that goes on talking about control, because with the MDR provider, you don't really have the control of what happens when mistakes occur. So when you have your own staff, you get to determine how those mistakes are handled and exactly what happens to those that made the mistakes. And there's also the little bit of an issue of the internal tribal knowledge that was touched on, where if your staff and the MDR provider don't have the tribal knowledge of exactly how everything works in your network, there's going to be those mistakes. So comprehensive MDR and response requires really knowing all of that internal knowledge.
So I've heard a lot about trust. So let's talk about trust. What's your perspective on trust in cybersecurity? And let's start with you, Gary.
So, I mean, the first thing I would say coming from a cybersecurity background in general is trust no one, because, well, I come from offensive security and I've seen all of these terrible incidents that have occurred in the past. There's the SolarWinds incident that occurred. I've been a part of many different rogue employee incidents and the responses to that. But for trusting of a vendor, there really just needs to be a balance, the balance between your trust, the security, the finances, and the usability of the options the vendor provides. I think that balance is really the key.
Balance. Harry, what's your perspective?
I basically agree with Gary, but just to diverge a little bit, the advantage that you have with an MDR provider is contractual. So there are defined boundaries and limitations of liability that can control that trust relationship.
Did we lose
that? Do a bit more freedom to trust the MDR provider, because it's spelled out in your agreement.
Right. Stefan, anything to add?
Yeah, when you're talking about trust, I mean, not to go Joel Embiid here, but trust the process. It's really about putting a process together that actually helps establish trust and being able to have an agreed upon methodology between you and the vendor of this is how things operate, and this is the bounds of where things are, and you have that process in place that you can actually trust that that procedures and everything are being followed and things are established in the correct way.
So if trust is so critical in all of this, how can MDR providers earn trust? Well, let's go with you, Harry, first.
I think one of the first things you should do is test the waters, for lack of a better term. Define a set of situations to that you would turn over remediation to the provider, and that gives you a foot in the door to establish a trust relationship and that can be, expanded on and refined and evolved during the course of the relationship.
Stefan, what's your perspective?
I think it really boils down to having, kind of like I said before, having the process in place, having agreed upon things. I think in a lot of ways, sometimes it boils down to the playbook between you and the MDR provider of, if this is the type of action you see, these are the kind of responses that are within bounds of what you're trying to do. I would find very few customers that would be out there who would be able to trust a vendor to just take any action without any sort of guidance or anything like that. And so it's about putting together the process and the playbook of what is the established boundaries of what actions you should take, and at what point should you escalate it to somebody internally and say, hey, this falls outside the scope of what we've been doing. Let's solve this one together.
Excellent. Gary, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, just to build on top of that and those excellent points, back on that relationship and balance, the other piece that's needed there is the usability piece, to ensure that the client gets the information they need to make good decisions. So the executives get good reports out of what's happening and know that things are active and working well, all the way down to the very people on the ground that are taking response and going, hey, this situation happened and I need to respond to it. The communication part is definitely a key to earning trust.
Well, great dialogue. Let's open the floor to questions from our audience. Garrett, do we have any questions?
Yes, actually, we had a question here. It says, why should you demand containment from your MDR provider?
Panel?
Well, I think honestly, demanding containment is one of the core issues there. If you think about the process of analyst gets an alert that saying endpoint's been compromised, ransomware, whatever. If that analyst is able to act immediately, contain the endpoint, keep that from spreading, block anything else from going on, you're talking about an incident that boils down to, we noted in our log and we replace somebody's laptop, or we rebuild it. If you look at, the standard model, the MSSP model, it's, hey, we saw an alert, we take whatever time we have to see it, we're going to escalate it to this guy, who will escalate it to this guy, who will move it over here, who actually take action on the device. And just going through that chain of bureaucracy, or whatever you want to call it, you're looking at, on the fast end, you're probably looking at, 30, 45 minutes. That's a lot of room that ransomware can spread. And, Gary, from dealing with incidents, I'm sure can talk about plenty of stories where things have spread, and the difference between somebody being able to respond in 5 minutes versus somebody responding in an hour versus somebody not responding at all.
Speaking of which, Gary, I'm sure you have a lot to add to this. What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, just to bring up the quick and dirty example, Reevil, one of the ransomware groups, they have records of, well, within an hour or two, we infected your network to everything's encrypted, pay us. So, that 45 minutes is really, really pushing the edge. By then, they have credentials, they've exfiltrated information. It could be all over before someone can actually go, oh, we locked down this one workstation. Hey, the domain controller just pushed out ransomware. Yeah, it can be really, really bad there. Rapid response to a threat that's been pretty much verified is key to just keeping your network safe.
Well, and containment's kind of the first step in response.
Exactly. Containment is the containing the threat so it doesn't spread.
Right. Harry, anything to add?
Yeah, one comment is, you've got to remember, in all of this, that in the last several years, the attackers have gotten automated, sophisticated, and are using some really advanced techniques to propagate things. So the sooner you can shut down the doors, to allow propagation, the your life will be, and that's containment.
Yeah, and as just a last little point that you have there, when you're really talking about containment, and people talking about trust, and the whole idea of, do you trust your vendor to do this? think about it in terms of risk versus reward. You know, you see this very verifiable alert. You have your MDR provider lock down that endpoint. You potentially stop the spread of ransomware. What's the risk in that model of having your MDR provider? Well, the risk is obviously they make a mistake. They lock down something that wasn't there. What's the actual damage? You've inconvenienced one person for 15 minutes, as opposed to taking the other model of, well, we're not going to trust them at all. We don't want them to take a response. We're going to go through the whole bureaucracy. Now your entire organization is inconvenienced for a week and is out a lot of money.
Excellent point, Stefan. Garrett, do we have another question?
Yeah, we actually have about 2 more questions here that I see. This one, we just talked about containment. This next question is about readiness. How does an MDR provider prove your readiness to take on the response?
Panel, who wants to take that first?
Well, I'll start things off.
All right, go ahead, Eric.
So and this goes back to the getting your feet wet statement that I made earlier. So maybe you don't want implicit trust, to the MDR provider, straight out of the box, but being able to put together scenarios that you would allow them to take the first steps and basically evolve the situation and build that trust relationship, is probably the best way to get side of the equation.
Stefan, I know you have something to add. Yeah, no, absolutely. When you're really talking about, the situation like that, you've got, as it really boils down to, it is like you said, it is about the trust. And so what you're really trying to do is it really proving the readiness boils down to the vendor demonstrating, in my opinion, that they understand your environment and in a lot of ways that they understand your reason for existence. I mean, the example I always use is that, when I talk to security people is, it relates to mountain climbing. I like to climb mountains, so it's a great way to do it, to relate it to people. But security folks tend to think that security is the mountain. It's not the mountain. The business is the mountain. So having that security provider understand that they're the ropes, the harnesses, the everything else to keep you safe as you're going up there, as opposed to it being the end goal in and of itself. If they can show, we understand your business, we understand your mission, healthcare, it's, patient care. I mean, things like you understand the mission, you understand how the organization is structured, where the critical things are. That's the first hurdle. If you don't understand the business at all, you're never going to make the right decisions.
Love the mountain analogy. Gary, you have anything to add?
Yeah, just to be the bad guy and go drop into a little bit of the technical side of it. One of the things I've found most useful is if they can display competence. So for example, you have an alert that comes in, oh, you might have malware here. Here's some instructions you can follow to solve this. We know how to do it. I mean, you just haven't turned it over to us yet. So we can tell you exactly how to do it. Your people can follow our instructions and it works. Well, that's the first step in going, well, next time, why don't you just have us do it? Because you see, we know how to do it right.
Right.
And that kind of builds the trust over time because they see that you're competent. And it's not that you're just saying, hey, this is a problem. You're saying, hey, this is exactly how to fix it. And you're saving them time and they're realizing, hey, we can actually save even a little more time. Let's trust them a little more.
Love it, Gary. Garrett, we had one more question.
Yeah, the last question here is, what is the difference between response in MDR and then an incident response?
Panel.
I think Gary should answer.
I think
I'm sure everyone's going to point to the incident response.
All right, Gary, you're up.
Yeah, so the real difference is MDR handles the this might be bad, while incident response handles the this is bad or this has been bad. So it's a matter of time. Now, MDR is trying to prevent the bad from ever happening, and that is their goal. And incident response is to come in afterwards and go, hey, bad happened, here's how we recover from it and make sure it never happens again. there is an intersection between the two. When incident response goes, something's weird, we don't know how it got in here, let's talk with the incident response team and really figure something out. But really, that's the major difference, is time.
Stefan, your
So
perspective.
I'm gonna say the dirty little secret. I mean, there's no MDR provider, no SOC, no anything else in the world that's going to ever have a perfect track record. So having an incident response as the backup behind that is really a critical piece of where you want to be in the whole picture. And like Gary said, MDR, we want to prevent a bad thing from happening, instantly contain it, do those other things. Something gets by the MDR, or God forbid, you don't have somebody watching the front gate here. Something bad has happened. That's really when the incident responders come in. They're the folks who are going to be like, okay, where is this bad thing? How do we contain? How do we help you rebuild? How do we do these kind of things? It's sort of the difference between the little alert on your car when you get too close to somebody that starts beeping at you, and the airbag that saves your face from hitting the dashboard.
Exactly. And then to even expound on this further, incident response, the other major effect is rogue employees.
Yeah.
Your MDR is not going to see that usually. They might catch it eventually, but that's where it gets really tricky.
Right. Well, Harry, I'll let you have the final word.
Okay, so I'm tempted to say what they said, but I think the real direction should be, incident response is necessary because it's a crazy world. You can't anticipate everything. So having an early response hopefully keeps you out of an incident response situation.
Great dialogue. Well, we're getting close to this end of the session, so we need to stop and announce the winner of the $100 gift card and 1 hour consultation.
Yep, and just finished and removed our TorchLight